Chile here with Sirius Talis Moon, continuing in episode 2 with Chiron in Aries, particularly Chiron Aries in Aries, which gives us anything that moves through Aries with the E, basically gets a scientific renaissance. And this is where I want to, and now Chiron moving through Aries, meaning that the way we see Chiron gets a scientific renaissance. So I want to address the second part of Chiron in Aries, which is what people call developmental wounds or developmental phase, and talked about behavioral and how Chiron and Aries make it different to look at those things. First of all, the co-presence of Chiron and Aries, telling us that the way we see the wounds of developing from the infant phase, the sense of self, the identity, and so on and so forth, it can both be the wound around the way that people saw the soul entering the body, and the wound of, for aristocracy, it can mean um, the wounds, even the fact that I'm afraid to give shout outs to names because I don't know if either of us would be attacked because of that, is a Chiron Aries wound. um, and so when it comes to certain children, the wound around the coming of the soul to the body, because of the practices to do with, I think it is an infant being sacrificed and then taking a certain infant, that looks like, what the version that I received, it was that looks like the weaker infant or the infant that doesn't cry, and again, that could be, this is one version, or taking a certain infant, and that infant would have kind of like a reincarnation of somebody that is summoned into the infant, and that process is, let's just say, not the Orient, not light and roses and tenderness and so on. Um, Now, I don't know, like, and it can affect the second frontier children, even if they weren't born into the aristocracy. Um, or something of that sort. Again, and this is how people would see, like, different bloodlines and so on. So that effect can affect the identity, but also when we talk about developmental phases and disabilities, Chiron in Aries is definitely a wound around ability to do something. And it can have to do with the developmental phase of basically the head of the baby, which can be birthing and can be infanthood. That being said, the places that are treating the developmental phases are never to leave your child alone there, and never to take for granted what any of one of those people say. Okay, including what I say. If you interpret things in me that I didn't say or something like that, then, and even if something that I did say and it comes out and it feels off, a part of it is Chiron being in Aries and me addressing that, and a part of it is the fact that the nature of Chiron is that one has to sort the wheat from the chaff when it comes particularly to the sense of self-identity and all of these things. So, and this can also create in the parent a challenge around, for example, a very high achieving, very able parent can have a child with such a disability, um, And this is where through the child accepting the part that whatever the wisdom that so-called disability is coming to show, because that disability is usually formed, if I think about Moses and the coal, it's a disability that is coming to save one from perpetuating some sort of occultistic crime, particularly when it comes to Chiron and Aries. The tender motorics for me as child would mean that if there are tender motorics to do with illegal substances, I would not be able to tend to them. Because I'm thinking, okay, what do people need tender motorics for? Um, the speech disability where I can broadcast on and on but not have a conversation. So if your children or if you as adults have experienced certain disabilities, those disabilities might have been created to prevent certain things to do with these occultistic practices that are not in favor of humanity from being manifested. And funnily enough, some of these are results of those occultistic practices. It's kind of like an adaptation of the identity in the brain. Any wound around the genetics could definitely be. And here again, um, this wound could be the sign to discontinue certain practices if it's like inbreeding and stuff, or families that are too close genetically. For example, in Israel, we cannot have a genetic test without approval of courts. And actually, the unpublished book of my mother tended to um, a brother and sister that were almost becoming together. And this is because uh, actually the wound around ritual abuse can create challenges to fertility. And because it also creates relational challenges, and then people might be met with people with whom they are lunarly incompatible. Again, matrilineal wounds as a result of two young women giving birth. The only respect to the feminine is as the mother, and then and so on and so forth. Or women having to become mothers to save themselves, or even women desire that women will be mothers so that they will sacrifice and do things like crimes against humanity, be trafficked and agree to traffic, and so on and so forth. Um, which is why I say cultures that fear Lilith a lot when it comes to the infants are cultures that are Epstein-like. Okay, because that. um, and this is also when we talk about disabilities, cultures that have a slavery factor in them. Now, slavery factor can simply be workaholic parents. Okay. Um, And um, the disability can be, there can be a wound around competence. Um, that has to do with, for example, if there is an intelligence, Epstein infiltration of the intelligence, and intelligence infiltration of the working sector, they may ask every child to be raped in order to have a job. Um, and then that child can have active working disabilities. Or if the parents are like in groups and social groups where they try to have agendas to kill the disabled, as naturally that children with disabilities will be born. ARIS is usually about changing the way we treat disability. Both understanding that the disability was an adaptive way of adapting to a sovereignty violating society. And when the society is no longer sovereignty violating, that disability can be miraculously cured. Now, to each type of child or adult child, or okay, whether it's somebody who's ruler of Chiron is in Aries, let's say Chiron Jupiter, if Jupiter is in Aries, Chiron Gemini, if Gemini is in, if Mercury is in Aries, and so on and so forth. Even Chiron Taurus, if you have Venus in Aries, even if you have Chiron Taurus, you're going to experience Chiron ingressing to Taurus as a continuation of your Chiron return. I will talk about the Chiron Taurus later. Because to understand Chiron, for the Chiron Taurus, I want people to also listen to Chiron Aries, because the Chiron Taurus is lying on the places where the Chiron Aries wasn't healed. Okay, think about it. If an infant grew to an environment where even its siblings, let's say, had a bigger brother or bigger sister, older brother, older sister with Chiron Aries, and then this child was born with Chiron Venus, Chiron Taurus, a wound around the feminine. That person could have had a feminine quality to their appearance. Um, that could have been not accepted by peers, or a feminine gender that was not accepted by peers, or a wound around relationship that had to do with honoring the feminine. And honoring the feminine is also honoring the infant self. Taurus would be the developmental phase where children begin to stuff things into their mouth. And so that, if Aries would be the phase where the child is just an infant lying in bed, will the child live, will not, and so on, then Taurus is the part where the child begins to stuff things in their mouth. And now, here is the thing: somebody could have a ruler of their Chiron in Aries, and their wound can trigger the Chiron Taurus wound. For example, if an Aries is in an infant phase, and so that wasn't honored, then this is where relationally they could be triggering the Chiron Venus that needs to honor the feminine. Now, if the infant phase was not honored, then also the feminine was not honored. Now, to people that have a real challenge with feminine, masculine, yin and yang, amazing. This means that you folks need to cover in your theories what I am saying when you come out of the binary division. One point could be the courtesan-cartesan division, and how did rape of infants play in the artificial creation of the binary. Now, that can be theories that would be fascinating to um, to learn. Um, and and it would be interesting to translate what I am saying into those theories that I don't yet have. And I actually have a wound in Gemini, which is the binary. And this is that some of these occult practices were working on the binary, but in a way that is rapey. And so our access to the non-binary was by coping mechanism rather than the natural non-binary that can exist. But for that, we'd need to abolish, let's say, ritual abuse of infant, and even for adults to access their infant phase without ritual abuse. So, of course, if the infant phase was not honored, the feminine was not honored, and the next one is indeed Chiron in Taurus, which has to do with honoring of the feminine, regardless of if it is a man or a woman or a non binary person. Um, the wounds, the Chirons that came before and after Aries are also clue. Before Chiron Aries came Chiron Pisces, which is a wound around both children and religion. And the after is a wound around the feminine. So if you think about the sextile between Chiron in Pisces and Chiron in Taurus, is a religion that doesn't honor the feminine, creates a double Chiron, a Chiron about religion and a Chiron about honoring the feminine. The sandwich child is the Chiron Aries, which is basically not being honored as a child because it is feminine. Um, The Chiron Taurus may have a challenge in relationships. They might enter a relationship with someone, and both them and that someone actually need to access their one or another of their infant stage, which is considered the feminine. And so both them and the other person might try to sort things out relationally when the wound is in the infant phase that wasn't honored because it was the feminine. So it can be like, the satirical situation of uh, being myself a woman in her late 30s with Uranus in Taurus, to her 40s, connecting trying to connect with the inner goddess or the feminine energy, and feeling that there's still a grand missing, there's still a dissociation, and then kind of like when the non-erotic child phase comes up, which is also the infant phase without rape, it's kind of like, oh, that was what was missing. And how that can create all kinds of uh, triggering of woundings of people around. We're like, but you're not a child. Yeah, but that developmental phase is actually needed for me to function as a human being, ever, in a relationship or not. The Chiron Taurus, if I can give one tip that I can think about for the Chiron Taurus, is take into account that the feminine is also the various infant phases. And and the, and and if you grew up in society where, even in societies where they really like to have boys but not girls, um, there can be a wound around the infant being basically also the feminine as regards to those societies. because it is the helpless, because it is, now as triggering as it is, to understand it in that context is actually important, because this is what was the wound. And then coming out of that wound would be the theories that people that challenge the binary notion may have, which might be even healing from my Gemini wound, for example. So, by the way, Gemini can also be contrarian, and the wound in Gemini, Chiron in Gemini, can also be people being contrarian regarding identity if they have Mercury, let's say, in Aries, or contrarian regarding the feminine if they have Mercury, let's say, in Taurus. It means is when a person says I am, somebody tries to tell them that they're not. Although before that everybody were telling them to figure out who they are or something like that. Because Aries is a wound of origin, it can also be around people's origin and even people's national identity. It's like everybody trying to connect them, let's say, with, I don't know, let's say Dutch. And then when I say I'm half Dutch, people are like, but wasn't all this thing about to connect me to my Dutch nationality? No, תודה. So these are some current things to think about, and that the developmental wound around Aries is society that has toxic masculinity because it dishonors the feminine. And the fact that the child being the feminine is not accepted for its identity or for its origin, and it can even be around the origin of the child if the origin is considered kind of like not masculine enough or not able enough, or too slow, because it can be also about speed with Mars. It's a fast moving sign. And so um, all of these pertain to things that need to be accepted for a happy development, usually also in one or both of the parents. And um, and the problem is not with the child, but the society that needs to honor the whatever is seen as the feminine by the societies, which means um, either being slow or um, for some people it might look like acting blonde. I'm not joking, because when think about when people had to either play dumb or they had a wound that would make them look dumb in certain contexts contexts where that would prevent them from being, let's say, ritually abused by those who would seek really competent or superhuman children. And some of us had to navigate the wound of being in a limited space of dead alive, so to not be murdered, but also to not be ritually abused, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'll eat my breakfast.